JoJo!
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the EZAnime podcast. I am Brad Ellis. This is Ben Moore.
Hello. So you already have a lot of questions, and so I want to do some housekeeping before we get started. Today we're talking about JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. However, we realized as we were planning this show and trying to figure out, we wanted to do one big comprehensive episode, but we also want to give it enough space that we're talking about these things in depth and meaningfully. So this is going to be JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 1.
Ooh.
I also don't want to take away, I don't want to have the next episode take up your vote. So we'll do JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 2 at some interstitial point where we can do it as a bonus episode, something like that. We're still figuring out the scheduling, and the reason we're still figuring out the scheduling is we want the other EZA JoJo fans, namely Brandon Jones and Kyle Bossman, to be on there as well and as caught up as they can possibly be. So for Part 2, expect them on the show.
Please be excited.
Please be excited. So we're going to be talking about Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, and Part 4. And a new thing that we're going to be doing for the first half of the show is a lot of you aren't familiar with JoJo's Bizarre Adventure like you weren't with Berserk. And so you weren't sure, is this a spoiler part? Is this a non-spoiler part? First half of the show, going to be non-spoiler. We're going to talk about what the series is, why it's special, where you can watch it, read it, all that sort of stuff. So if you just kind of want a cursory overview of what a series is, expect that in every EZAnime from here on. To start with that, Bradley Ellis, what is JoJo's Bizarre Adventure?
JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is the tale of a family lineage battling against evil. Takes place with several different, starts off, much like Castlevania, I would say, right?
Sure.
Kind of going through the relatives and everything like that.
Yeah, definitely. You can make a comparison there.
I mean, I guess when you just say the basic, outline, the Joestar family is going to be battling some evil. And that's pretty much what's about. But I would say the most important thing is the little moments inside of it kind of thing. But that's
Yes,
a broad
Brad.
idea kind of what it is.
Definitely. I think when you kind of take a broad look at the show, and if you were to read a summary, you're kind of missing what makes JoJo's Bizarre Adventure special. Because I think at a basic level, it's just very powerful dudes fighting very powerful evil dudes.
Yeah, a lot of yelling.
And as they go through, there are new evil dudes that have new evil powers. And so it seems kind of basic in a very broad sense.
Yep.
But it is the little details. It is how the show uses humor. It's absurd creativity. It's like that stuff that makes it so special. It also changes a lot.
Yeah, it does.
When you compare Part 1 to Part 2, and then Part 2 to Part 3, and then Part 3 to Part 4, all of those are super different from each other. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I guess I could. Part 1, oh man, it's hard for me to say this without going into detail and spoiling kind of things about it.
Sure.
Pretty much, it's about this kid. He has a so-called adopted brother, I would kind of say.
Yeah,
named
so
Dio.
Jonathan Joestar.
Great guy. He's a great guy, you know. Jonathan Joestar's a good person. Dio is the exact opposite. They're the most yin and yang combo you could ever think of.
Whoops.
Obviously, things go bad between them, and Dio does some really sketch stuff. And it turned into something I did not expect when I started the series. I had no idea what it was about. Part 2, going a few years later, his grandson, Joseph Joestar, my bad.
Yep,
Joseph Joestar, where he's kind of dealing with, and the remnants of his grandfather's past still kind of around him. Maybe some few characters from there too, maybe something like that. Part 3, well, obviously, Joseph battles some spooky evil dudes. Don't want to talk about that yet. We'll get into that more later. Part 3, Jotaro, Joseph's grandson. A lot of grandsons going on here. Living in a different country, or a different country than we're used to, kind of thing going on there.
Yeah.
Living in Japan. High school kid kind of thing, or a junior high kid. Going through all that, going through a journey to save his mom. Some old encounters, I would say.
Yeah, it's interesting how each new arc chooses to connect to previous arcs, and the ways in which they connect are different as it goes on.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of same kind of thing, you know, battling evil, like we said, like
Yeah.
that. But like we said, Little Months, which we'll get into more like that. And part 4, which I'm not very far in. You're more an expert with this, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you take this part then?
Diamond is Unbreakable. So Diamond is Unbreakable, to me, is kind of like a better version of Stardust Crusaders. And I think to make sense of all of the parts, you kind of have to realize what each of them does. And it's cool because you kind of see the creator of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Hirohiko Araki. I believe I said that correctly.
Amazing art.
Yes,
super
absolutely
unique.
amazing. Yeah, Hirohiko Araki. That's correct. You sort of see him evolve as a storyteller and an artist, because if you look at part 1, Phantom Blood, Jonathan Joestar is basically just Fist of the North Star dude. Like,
it's a good comparison. Yeah,
he looks exactly like him, and Jonathan Joestar is your very typical sort of classic protagonist.
Hero, yeah,
classic protagonist and hero, where he's sort of this like infallibly good person, where he's just like, all right, I believe I have this good moral fiber, I'm gonna follow through it, I'm gonna vanquish evil.
It feels like part 1, Phantom Blood, is the most like classical in that kind of sense, and how their characters are portrayed. Like, because Dio is just evil.
Yeah,
just evil bad guy.
What I like about Dio, though, and something that I think really gives the series kind of its anchor, is Dio is evil because his entire life he was convinced that the world was shit. Like, he just had this absolutely terrible father. He was treated miserably. And so Dio, you know, becoming a young adult, he decides, all right, I'm going to go on and I'm going to, like,
he's
rule
essentially
the world.
But he's essentially trying to ruin that family, the
Right.
Joestars, in the process.
Right. And I think it's a common theme in it. I know it's a common theme in a lot of anime where sort of the people that surround you shape your worldview, and that's definitely what you see with Dio. And so Dio is evil, but he's not just evil just because, right? He's not a Joker type character.
Yeah, I'd say he does some things. He does some things literally just to get at Jonathan, though, to make Jonathan mad, like with his dog.
But I think it's because Dio views how happy Jonathan is. Because
he's jealous.
Before Dio came in and was adopted by Jonathan's father, Jonathan had no problems. Like, he was just a very happy dude.
He's like, hey.
And then Dio comes in and he ruins his life. But anyway, this is supposed to be a summary. And so what I'm trying to say is you have sort of this very classic hero versus this very classic villain, and this sets up the rest of the series. Yep. And then you have part 2, Battle Tendency, where Joseph Joestar is the exact opposite of Jonathan. Or maybe not the exact opposite, but an extreme pivot.
Like, he's a good guy.
Right.
But he's, like, way more edgy, I would say.
Yeah. He's sly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And because he's not afraid of using underhanded tactics.
Yeah, he's, like, not afraid to talk back kind of the thing to people like that.
No.
Yeah.
He just straight up, like insults
Jonathan,
people.
I always saw himself as, like, a gentleman.
Right, absolutely.
Joseph he's not. He's way different than that.
Right. He's a scoundrel.
He's like a street punk.
Yeah.
That's what he is.
Definitely. If Jonathan Joestar is maybe a Ben Kenobi or a Luke Skywalker, Joseph Joestar is very much a Han Solo.
Yeah.
But it even like dirtier, rough around the edges, like even rougher than that.
Yeah.
And so that pivot makes part 2 feel way different than part 1.
Yeah, it does.
It has this edge to it that part 1 did it, and I think it makes it a more interesting arc. But a lot of the connections, a lot of the setup for part 2 wouldn't have happened because of part 1. And then part 3 takes another pivot, not just in terms of character, but I would say in terms of structure as well. It's very, very, very different structurally than parts 1 and 2.
I would like part 3 felt much more like classical manga to me.
Sure.
Like, do you know what I mean? Like, especially with all the fights that happens in it, especially.
Part 3, Stardust Crusaders is the name of the part, and the Joestar of that part, or he doesn't have Joestar at the end of his name, but his name is Jotaro.
Jotaro, yeah.
And he's Joseph Joestar's grandson.
Can we talk about his hat real quick?
It's okay. Can I just say, and there are going to be a lot of moments like this on this podcast. Jotaro is not my favorite JoJo, but goddamn is he just so cool.
I love him.
He's so goddamn cool.
I love him.
You just look at him, and he looks awesome.
He's just like, yuddy, yuddy.
Yeah, yeah. And so, what you brought up there, I think, is a good point of comparison to Joseph and Jonathan, because Jotaro sort of presents this image of, like, I don't care.
He's like the typical cool kid, high school kid.
Yeah.
Doesn't talk a lot, doesn't like troublesome things, kind of like that. But he's a badass.
He is. He's just sort of a badass. That's a good way of describing him. And whereas Joseph Joestar did like to talk a lot in battle, and he liked to sort of taunt his enemies and crack jokes, Jotaro doesn't really do
He's
that.
quiet a lot, you know?
Yeah, Jotaro just kind of punches people in the face a lot. Yeah. Yeah. There are a ton of good memes in JoJo, but I think some of the most persistent and well-known ones sort of come from Part 3, except for Roundabout, which we'll get to. We'll get to the music. Yeah, so structurally, Part 3 is sort of like a villain of the week kind of thing.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
It does, yeah. I guess that's where we're coming back to that classic kind of thing. You're like, we got this guy. This character has his fight with this villain.
Right.
This character next week has his fight with this character, kind of thing like that.
Yes, absolutely. And again, we're trying to describe what's going on without spoiling things, but it is very much of, all right, we're going to encounter this adversary, and then we're going to move on. And there are some returning adversaries, but for the most part, it's kind of a one-and-done deal. What I really like about Diamond is Unbreakable, Josuke is the JoJo of that one. And talking a little bit about Josuke, he's the first JoJo that, like, his stand... So we got to talk about stands...
Personas.
And Ripple and all of that stuff. We have to get into the powers. But Josuke sort of is a blend between the other Joestars, I would say, because he is kind of a badass like Jotaro, but he's a little bit softer, I think. He's got more of an understanding side to him. A little bit more sympathetic. You can see a little more Jonathan in him. You can see a little bit more Jonathan in him. So he's sort of like Jotaro, but he's maybe a little bit more well-rounded. And in a similar way, I think Diamond is Unbreakable kind of follows the Stardust Crusader, where you are constantly being introduced to new adversaries, new foes with new powers. That's happening a lot. But I think why Diamond is Unbreakable is more interesting is because those adversaries feel like they have more to them. Like
I feel like from what I've seen, it feels like they have more of a motive for what they're doing.
They have more of a motive beyond just I'm serving this person.
I'm being an evil bad guy kind of thing.
Right. And they don't just get critically injured or die or something. They'll have a battle and then they'll come back and they might be a hero. They might work alongside. And so there's this consequence to the villains. There's this lasting sense in Diamond is Unbreakable that I really like. I think Diamond is Unbreakable, as a result, is a better told story because it has more going on and it feels like the events in the immediate future have a little bit more impact. So that was kind of a rough and tumble summary of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. But let's just drill right down to it. We're spending an entire podcast talking about JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Why? Why do you, Bradley Ellis, like this anime/manga so much?
Two things. The battles and the characters.
Yeah.
I love the Joestar family. I love the villains. And I love the world they're living in. It seems like a almost kind of believable world, you know? It's like, hey, it takes place in our world, I guess, with like a few supernatural elements, which is pretty sweet to me. I
would say the supernatural elements get like more and more pronounced as the series goes on.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. But talk about the battles really quick.
Oh my god. Like
the battles are
max
fantastic.
Testosterone with a lot of these fights. A lot of like, okay, everyone in this show is humongous. Like all the Joestars are huge ripped dudes. Like they're like
comically ripped.
Yeah, it's like super manly, like brawls going on. Oh my god, it's super violent sometimes too, which I love.
It's so violent, Brad, but it's again I was thinking about Yakuza as I was like trying to parse JoJo's Bizarre Adventure in my head, and something that we've gotten on the microphone and said about Yakuza is it does comedy and seriousness very well. But when I think about Yakuza, it's sort of like the series is flipping a switch. It's like, all right, this is serious time, this is comedy time. Obviously, there are moments where they're intermixed, but I think for the most part, they're kind of separated. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is not that way.
There's comedy and serious moments like at any moment.
Right. They're so interconnected. Even when it's brutally violent, even when someone's getting their face shot off, they're kind of making a joke about it.
It's like, oh my God!
Yeah,
Just like how they deal with every situation is super funny.
Yeah. It's the violence never stops being shocking though. Like
no.
I think I see somebody's face get ripped off or like an ear being blown off or somebody blinded. And I'm like, all right. I'm kind of desensitized to this.
Like,
and I feel like they come up with a new ridiculous
when I started this series, I had no idea what it was about. I just knew the name and everything like that.
Yeah.
And some things happened, and I was like, what? I didn't expect this from this series. This is out of control right now.
Yeah. And another thing you brought up was characters. So, in a lot of ways, I think the characters are defined a certain way, and they kind of follow that through. You know, Iggy is the dog. There's a dog named Iggy. He's a Boston Terrier.
It's a dog.
He can use he has supernatural powers as well. He likes to eat. The only thing that he like gets obsessed over is coffee flavored chewing gum.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
And he likes to jump on people's faces and bite out their hair. But by the end of the series, I really cared about JoJo's Bizarre Adventure.
Yeah.
Or I've really cared
Iggy.
about Iggy. Yeah, I always cared about JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. And it's weird how they make that happen, where they're kind of just joking around, but it does feel like they're building up to
because they
something.
give you moments of depth with the characters.
They do,
and you can like get an understanding of where they're coming. Like for example, with Iggy, like you get the perspective of what Iggy's thinking, the kind of whole thing on like House Adventure, he was annoyed with doing it, kind of thing like that. But then at a certain point in this adventure, he ends up caring for these people he hated originally.
Yeah, and I think the reason you sort of get there with Iggy and you're like, oh no, he's more than just this dumb dog, is because they have sort of this 2-episode arc where he's involved in his own battle. And he's developing, like they spend time developing that character. And I think all the way back to part 1, they don't do this with everyone, but I would say with the most pivotal characters, they always have that episode where they sneak in a little depth.
Yeah. I mean, especially with part 1, it's much smaller, I feel like.
Right.
Then as like, you know, you go to part 2, part 3, it gets a little more bigger, more characters, kind of thing like that.
The other thing that I want to talk about is just sort of the visual audio side. You were talking a bit about like the extreme testosterone of the characters in JoJo, and you're totally right. It's just these insanely ripped giant men in every arc, but there's also this stylishness to them.
Oh yeah,
like they're not.
Oh yeah,
they're not just these.
They're not your typical like meathead,
right?
Frat bro kind of thing.
Right. They're very fashion savvy.
Yes, I would say way ahead of their time.
Yeah, and the use of color in JoJo, it's very loud.
Yeah, the color palette.
It's very in your face. And again, you kind of see that evolve throughout the series, because I think if you look at Phantom Blood, it's sort of very dark, very muted colors. You know, you have this big mansion. You have the streets of London. You've got the vampire vibe. So kind of this dark, gritty atmosphere.
Yeah.
And then Battle Tendency gets a little bit more playful, but it's like you have Caesar, who I think is definitely like kind of the loudest character up to that point, except for maybe his father. But then you have Stardust Crusaders, and I think it just goes off the rails here. I think this is really, regardless of how you feel about your favorite parts, I feel like part 3 is where JoJo sort of solidifies its identity and its style. And it does that with these different stands. And these stands are sort of supernatural powers that are sort of keyed off of the user's personality. So I guess
they're usually like a humanoid kind of thing. Like if you've played Persona, kind of how characters have personas, I think stands are like their personas pretty much.
Yeah, exactly like you said. Stands, their personas.
Yeah.
For people who don't know what a persona is, I guess, like Jotaro, the lead character of Stardust Crusaders, his stand is Star Platinum, and it's just this big purple muscly dude that's really quick and throws out a ton of punches all at once. So, you know, kind of like Jotaro, sort of talks with his fist kind of dude, Star Platinum embodies that. And from part 3 onward, they all use stands.
Yeah.
But going back to Araki's art, it's... I think when you describe how cool something is, it can be hard pinpointing down why.
Yeah.
But this art has been featured in museums, and you can totally understand
Yeah.
it. Because, and I think every part of the show, it just gets more and more detailed and impressive. Like, just Google JoJo's Bizarre Adventure art, and you can just marvel at all the things that come
unique.
up. And the anime, which we're through Diamond is Unbreakable with the anime right now, the anime does a fairly good job.
Decent job, yeah. Especially, I feel like in part 4, I feel like it looks way more like the actual art style of the manga.
I totally agree with you, Brad. I totally agree with you 100%. And it's it's a really, really faithful adaptation of the manga. I mean, they're not for the most part, they're not adding anything and they're not taking anything away. And I think the style does do justice to it, however. But the art in the manga is so good that it's worth seeking out and appreciating, because despite the anime being a really good adaptation, it's not quite as good as
I think realistically it wouldn't really be possible for them to do that.
Absolutely. And that's something that needs to be said, is it's a tightly budgeted show with intense time constraints. With when you put reality into the picture, it's like, oh no, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is a really excellent adaptation. Much better than a lot of other adaptations.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
All right. The last part, before we move into, I guess, more specific spoiler territory. I hope you all don't feel spoiled up until this point, because
there's a lot we've left out.
There's a lot we've left out.
I feel like it's hard for us to talk about parts without saying something, because it's like, a lot of it does come down to the family just fighting. Yeah. And it's that's what it seems like on the outside.
Yeah, I don't feel like we've given away any crucial story details. We're just trying to describe certain characters and how kind of each of these arcs play out. But before we move on to, I guess, more specific things where we're going to be less sensitive about spoilers, where you can watch/read JoJo's Bizarre Adventure.
So you can obviously buy some of the volumes, some of the manga is available for purchase. I believe you said it's not caught up though.
It's nowhere near caught up. So
there's fan translations now, kind of thing.
Yeah, so you can go and you can read fan translated versions. They're on part 8 for JoJo right now, and you can go and you can read fan translated versions of that. But if you want, I want to go to a store, buy an official release of this right now, currently available. So Viz is publishing these really, really nice, hardcover, gorgeous books. They're working through part 3 right now.
Okay.
They're gonna. I'm assuming we're gonna get all the way caught up, but that's gonna take some time, as it always does. And then the anime
you can watch on Crunchyroll. Was where I watched most of it.
Yep. And that anime is through part 4.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So this is the segment of the show where we're going to turn on spoilers. I guess we're gonna talk about specific things, moments that really stuck out with us, characters we really liked and why, and dig into more detail about that. So if you don't want to watch this part, thank you for joining us up until this point. Bradley Ellis, my first question for you, and maybe the most important. Favorite JoJo so far?
Oh, the family. Oh, I like all of them for different reasons, man.
Sure.
Oh, man. I love Joseph a lot. I really love Joseph, just because of his personality and everything. Like we said, the Han Solo, a little more goofy,
Yeah.
I think I'm digging Jotaro the most right now.
So you think Jotaro is your favorite?
Right now,
if we had to pin you down.
I think I go through phases with them.
Yeah.
But I think he's my favorite right at this moment.
I'm going to have to go with Joseph.
Yeah, it's
right.
He's
You're not sitting here and being like, no, dude, it should be Jotaro.
It's I totally understand. I totally get that. Yes. It's tomorrow, Joseph may be my favorite. Who knows?
Right. I think part of it comes down to how part 2 and how part 3 are structured. For part 2, you're pretty much, for the most part, following around Joseph and Caesar. Like, they're taking up the bulk of the screen time, whereas in part 3, you've got more of an ensemble cast.
Yeah, totally.
And those ensemble characters are really, really strong because you spend so much time with them. Abdul, awesome badass.
Yep.
Kakouin, kind of more of a cooler, collected figure. Very young guy. Polnareff, though, might be my absolute favorite.
He has my favorite stand. The whole series. I love his.
Yeah. We're throwing a lot of names at you.
Yeah,
but
sorry.
To describe Polnareff, he's French. He's got this big silver hairdo. Almost
he's got
like
the Kid and Play haircut, like straight up kind of thing.
Yes. And he's kind of an idiot.
Yeah, he is.
He is an idiot.
He's an idiot.
There are a lot of moments in Stardust Crusaders where he'll just do something really dumb and get everybody else
in trouble. Yeah.
But what I like about Polnareff is he's so brave. Like, he doesn't... The Joestars and a lot of the other characters try to outthink their opponents. And I feel like Polnareff, for the most part, is just like, no, I'm going to take you on.
Yeah.
And I'm so
strong. A little more reckless. Yeah.
A little more reckless.
A little more cocky.
Not that he doesn't have good ideas sometimes. He does. But the way that he stands his ground, and especially at the end of part 3, where he's kind of the first to take on Dio and the strength that he shows, it was a really cool moment. And he also gets... He's also more emotive than I think, like, Joseph is in part 3, or Jotaro, or Avdol. Like, when things go bad for some of those characters, he's the one that has kind of those deep reflective moments where he's like, oh, actually, they did mean a lot to me. Yeah.
I feel like, though, some of those moments, though, is because he has kind of nothing to lose at some points, I feel like. Like, his motivations for his journey... kind of thing, like especially his like sister's death, you know,
right?
That he doesn't have anything else, kind of like that, and these friends he makes,
right,
become his new kind of like family. Classic, you know, like manga.
Sure. I do like that. You know, they early on they say Polnareff is doing this because he wants vengeance for his dead sister, killed by Dio. But you have those episodes where that stand, that sort of genie in a bottle stand that creates a clay doll version of his sister and it messes with his mind. And so that motivation, while it's kind of lurking in the background, is brought to the forefront in that episode, and how he deals with it and how he moves on from it is a really good character moment, I think.
Totally.
What are some moments for you in JoJo that stick out?
When Dio becomes a vampire.
Yes, Brad, good call.
It's specifically the moment where they confront Dio in his castle at one point. And I was like, this is Castlevania right now. And he just like blows some dude's head off. And just got super violent all of a sudden. He's like sucking blood out of people. I'm like, this is the best thing ever. I did not expect this from this show. That's the moment I knew this was for me. I was like all of it was like cool and great. Like I love the fight that JoJo or Joseph or Jonathan has with like Tarkus and everything like that, like the chain and everything. I loved all that. But once they confronted Dio as a vampire, I was like, dude, yes, this is for me.
Brad, it's such a good moment to bring up, because now that I'm like thinking about that moment, the sort of skirmishes that you had between Jonathan and Dio, it was just like kids.
Yeah, like they always had like scuffles, and like they went to college at one point, and Dio was always mad because Jonathan was like better, you know, slightly, some things like that.
But it was sort of this very human, like, antagonistic relationship. And then you have this moment where Dio becomes this supernatural figure, and it's like, Jonathan can't touch this. Dio is so far beyond him right now. Like, he sticks his fingers in your neck and sucks out your blood. Bullets don't do anything to him. And that escalation, I think, was really well done. I've read it in the manga, and then I've watched that scene in the anime several times, and it's still menacing.
Several times.
Yeah.
That pleases me.
Yeah. Because the vibes that it gives off are they work.
Yeah.
Like that's
Yeah.
I think it's kind of the first moment in the series where it was like, okay, we're not messing around anymore. It feels like it has this
serious business
gravitas to it.
Yeah.
And that's actually something I kind of want to bring up and get your thoughts on. I was gonna save criticism to the end of the show, but I kind of want to bring it up here. I feel like Dio in part 1 feels so menacing, and in part 2, the Pillar Men, because they're sort of like even more advanced versions of Dio.
Yeah.
That menace kind of carries over.
Yeah.
But in part 3, like Dio is just sort of saved for the end.
He is.
Like they bring him up once in a while.
Part 3 is like about getting to Dio.
Right.
And Dio's like the final boss kind of thing like that. So they gotta go through all the other bosses to get to Dio.
Yes, that is very well
video
said.
gamey.
It is very video gamey. You were saying like other kind of like shonen manga. It is kind of like that. But I think one of the problems that I have with part 3, despite really liking it overall, is since Dio is just sort of this like very, very distant carrot on a stick, and they kind of blow through all of these other villains so quickly, you're sort of lacking that like constant menace, that constant threat that I think part 1 and part 2 have.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that?
Yeah, no, I agree with that kind of thing. Because it's like you said earlier, like villain of the week kind of thing like that. All right, like, let's just get through this guy. We got another one. Let's get through this guy. But yeah, part 1, because like Dio is so involved in it, he feels way more menacing. He's involved like way more. Because like we said, part 3 is only kind of at the end. Right. But it's really, the showdown's so good in part 3. Woohoo! It's so good.
There's a lot to what I would call the final battle. Yeah. In part 3, it goes on for like 4 episodes, but it's the best part of Stardust Crusaders, and makes Stardust Crusaders amazing on its own. The battle is so intense, just so violently gnarly.
In the streets, yeah.
And the build-up and the emotion, it's a word we use a lot, but it really does feel like a culmination.
Good payoff too.
Yeah, and you're reminded like, oh yeah, Dio is just the sickest villain.
Yeah, he's the best. Yeah, he's one of the greats.
Wait,
hold on, I want to dial back to part 2 real quick. Do you remember this? You told me a specific part in part 2 about that made you just love Joseph.
I hope. Yeah,
it's probably the part I'm thinking of.
Okay, go ahead.
There's a certain part in the series. A vampire is loose in like the city. Yep. Joseph whips out a Tommy gun and just blows this dude away. This is like the one of the earlier things you see from Joseph, going from Jonathan, who's like super like nice classic hero, then you get Joseph just pulling out a Tommy gun like a maniac. Like that sets the tone of like how different those two are from each other.
Brad, it might be my favorite moment in all of the JoJo that I've consumed so far.
It was straight out of Cowboy Bebop.
Yeah, it was. That's it. Yeah, I see where you're coming from with that, because it really does. I feel like critics subvert expectations all the time, and it's kind of become like a cliche thing to bring up when you're analyzing or criticizing something, but it really does subvert your expectations, because you think about how methodically and well thought out Jonathan deals with every situation in part 1. Like he has those like clever moments where he'll like in the heat of battle he'll think of some solution. Yeah. But when Joseph whips out that Tommy gun, it's so out of left field.
Yeah, you're like, what?
I remember watching the first time and I just went, what?
Yeah.
What? Because like the way they present it pre Tommy gun is they sort of frame it like a part 1 moment where it's like, oh man, what's gonna happen? You feel that like kind of ominous sense building up, and then Joseph is like, all right, blah, 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 and he just like shoots the guy out the window.
I feel like part 2 is where it gets even like a little more wacky.
Oh yeah,
because like
for sure.
We get Nazis coming in and everything like that. Like the guy who's like pretty much Guile.
Yep.
He like becomes half like robot or something like that. Goes off the rails, but it's so good.
It is. It's so good. Yeah,
you just think of moments like that. It's just hilarious.
One thing I really want to give a lot of credit to Diamond is Unbreakable for, I realize we haven't talked a lot about Diamond is Unbreakable, is the villains in the previous 3 parts are like supernatural in some sense, where the way that they're framed is, here's a supervillain with superpowers. You know, even though Dio like builds up to that, I think a lot of the stand users that you encounter, and the Pillarmen are a good example of just sort of these like supernaturally strong people. In Diamond is Unbreakable, the villains are very normal people that got altered by these powers.
By the bow and arrow.
Yeah.
It can draw out your stand.
Right.
Either you'll die or you'll get your stand drawn out.
Right.
So, there's like a serial like killer that like gets it.
Yes. And you like there's this like all these characters have these desires, and how these supernatural powers that they're given affect them chasing after their desires. It's interesting. It's I think in a way it's a lot more relatable and engaging than sort of, all right, here's the supernatural villain for this week. It's Star Wars Crusaders. And so that's something I want to give credit to Diamond is Unbreakable for. And having not consumed parts 5, 6, 7, and 8, I'm curious to see like
where it goes from there.
Yeah, where it goes from there.
Yeah, totally. I also like the setting. Diamonds Unbreakable, like it's just taking place in like a small Japanese town. Yep. Like we're used to kind of globetrotting.
Yeah, very much. It's you know, around the world in 80 days with Star Wars Crusaders, and you're totally right. The setting is a very good thing to bring up.
Much more contained, smaller scale right now too.
Yeah,
from what I'm going through right now, it's much more small scale.
It's more intimate, and I think,
which is cool.
Yeah, I think that's something that Part 1 did a good job of as well.
Yeah,
where
Part 1 was
very
Part 2,
focused.
Part 2 escalated. Part 3 kind of escalated even further than that. And Part 4 kind of just brought it all back down, which I think was a smart idea. Right. Because I think if it went bigger, just like so soon, it would probably be too much. Too many characters, too much to think about.
As a creator, I think Araki is really cool because I feel like he doesn't just think of a template and then follow it. You know, you have some very long-running manga, and JoJo is certainly a very long-running manga, where they sort of figure out a style and then just kind of they don't really deviate from it, and that's not necessarily bad. I think there are excellent creative works that find a good style and ride that all the way to the end. But there's sort of this like slapdash absurd creativity in JoJo where it's like, all right, this new part, we're gonna go in a completely different direction. I really respect that, and I don't think it always works. And I think like if you're new to JoJo, maybe like a part isn't gonna stick with you. But keep going. Yeah. Because by the time you get to the next part, you might be way into that.
I was thinking it's probably really a refreshing thing kind of for him. Yeah. Because he could, like we say, he can step outside the box. It's almost like a reset button in how he wants to present a certain, like JoJo is, like, I would say, like a very big book. Yeah. And each part is like a certain chapter or section like that. And he kind of gets to reset and do something new. Like maybe he had like some weird ideas that wouldn't work in the other parts. But now he's able to do that kind of thing.
Absolutely. Another thing that I want to give him credit for is just sort of this rebellious, almost idiotic, the way that he incorporates things that he loves. Like, he loves music, but it's not just like a cute wink, wink, nod, nod reference. It's just, no, you just named that character Cars after the band the Cars. You just named that character REO Speedwagon. That dude's stand is just called Red Hot Chili Pepper.
Yeah, Dio's probably named after the metal singer too.
Yeah, he is. Yeah. Right. Like, these aren't.
It reminds me of like Rockman and like Roll kind of thing like that. Like how rock and roll kind of thing like that. Just way more obvious.
Yeah, and you can definitely name
Red Hot Chili Pepper.
He's just named Red Hot Chili Pepper. He's just named Red Hot Chili Pepper. But like with you bring up Mega Man, Rockman, it's a good example because there is a lot of that. Yeah. But I feel like in JoJo, it's kind of overwhelming. Yeah. Like most characters are these super on the nose names in a way that like I can really get behind because he just does it and it doesn't think too much about it.
There's a character named Pet Shop, which I think is just a hilarious name for a character.
Right, exactly. And I think in less skillful hands, these characters would just sort of feel they would never transcend the fact that they're named after these bands or these musicians or these albums or whatever. But in JoJo, it gets to a point where you're not like when Speedwagon is on the screen, it reached to a point where I wasn't thinking like, oh yeah, that dude is just named Speedwagon. Like I eventually got over it because the character was compelling in and of itself.
I love Speedwagon, man.
Oh, he's the best.
So good.
He's the best.
Oh.
But yeah, I thought that was a funny thing, and the kind of creativity that Araki has, it's one of those things where you're like, wait, how did you come up with this? Like, why does Iggy like coffee flavored chewing gum?
Yeah,
that's a weird thing.
There's
how did you come up with that?
Yeah,
why does this stand an electrical outlet? You know, and I think that absurdity, that bizarre in the Bizarre Adventure, really comes through. But unlike something like a Fooly Cooly, where I think the weirdness is kind of all-consuming in a very good way.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel all-consuming here. Like, there's a lot of traditional storytelling intermixed with all of this insanity, which is really cool.
I'll just briefly want to talk about how they incorporate music really well into the anime also.
Brad, we haven't talked about music. We have to talk about the music. Yeah.
Especially with, Roundabout, just like, as like, they played at the end. It shouldn't fit that well into that series, you know? Like, why does it fit so good into that? It's perfect.
It is perfect.
Like, I mean, if you told me they're going to put a Yes song at the end of an anime and for it to be incredible, I'd be like, no.
It's weird because I think all of the openings and the endings and the song selections for all of those are all, like, really good.
Yeah.
But Roundabout with Yes kind of towers above all of them. And I don't think it's just because of the memes. It's just... All right. Here's what I think, Brad. You've got Yes and you've got Roundabout. Yes is kind of this dorky band.
Yeah.
You know, they're this progressive rock band.
It's a dad band.
But they're also kind of awesome.
Yeah, they're kind of sweet. Yeah.
I think that's what JoJo is.
Yeah.
It's this kind of dumb, dorky thing.
But that's really cool, actually. Yeah.
But it's actually really
on the surface,
cool.
it looks really like dorky, yeah. But when you dive in deep, you're like, whoa, this is sick.
Right.
Yeah, that's a great
I think that's what it is.
That's what JoJo is. Yeah, dude. Oh my god. I love the outro for Diamonds Unbreakable too, like that I've been hearing. I forgot what the song is, but it's super good. God, I wish I remember what it was called.
Yeah. And the song selection always surprises me. Like, I think it would have been easy to have a Roundabout style thing. But then you've got, you know, the Bengals, you've got Walk Like an Egyptian, and then you've got Last Train Home. Yeah. Like, all of those, much like the series itself, you know, it keeps doing these, like, pretty sharp pivots.
A lot of 80s.
All of this. Yeah. Yeah.
Which is not a bad thing.
No.
It's always, it's a good thing, usually.
Yeah. Something else that you kind of maybe just think of right there where you're like, a lot of 80s. I think in a weird way, I kind of, like, a lot of JoJo is super dumb and, like, crazy, but I also kind of appreciate the simplicity of it.
Yeah, yeah.
Sometimes
that's what I love.
Yeah.
I love it for that reason, yeah.
Yeah, sometimes I feel like sometimes I feel like some modern anime is just trying too hard. Yeah. Where it's like, no, take me seriously sort of a thing. And I don't feel like JoJo does.
No, they're just like, let's have fun.
Yeah, I think
JoJo to me is like, let's just have a good time and have fun.
Yeah.
Just relax, put your feet up, have a good time with JoJo.
Yeah. Oh, this podcast is getting me hyped on JoJo. Like, now I just want to...
Yeah, I know, right?
Just want to go watch more JoJo.
I know, like, we should just have it playing right there.
Brad, I think that our enthusiasm, like, we may not just be able to do 2 parts. We might have to do more than...
Yeah, we'll see.
We'll see.
We'll see.
But, you know, I don't think, like, because of the quality of what I've seen so far, I believe Part 5 is awesome. I believe Part 6 is awesome. I believe Part 7, like, we're going to put in the time, consume this stuff because we love it so much. Yeah. It's just, it's annoying that... we have so many other responsibilities and can't just watch anime all the time. I'm joking, of course. I don't really feel that way, but yeah. Are there any other criticisms that we want to levy at JoJo's Bizarre Adventure?
Criticisms. Part 3 goes on too long for me.
Yep.
I felt like.
Yep.
That's my biggest criticism with the series so far. So it didn't need to be that long, you know?
Yeah, I really do think you could cut out some of those battles and not miss all of that much.
Like, they weren't important, all of them, you know? Like the two brothers that have the book.
I actually think you could probably trim
It's just like, it's all right.
all 4 of the parts a little bit.
Probably.
I think maybe part 3 is the most egregious of what I've seen so far.
Because, it's super long,
It's
you know?
so long.
Compared to the other two.
Uh-huh. But I think the other thing, and I was realizing this, is the way that I've been consuming JoJo is in bulk.
Mm-hmm.
Where I will just sit down and be like, okay, it's time to watch 3 episodes of JoJo, 6 episodes of JoJo, 10 episodes of JoJo.
Mm-hmm.
And some anime / manga works really, really well for that, where you can just sort of dig in and it sort of just naturally works well with that style of consumption. Whereas I feel like JoJo, taking it as a weekly show, and that's why I'm excited to like get caught up, I think would be even more enjoyable. And that's sort of its original intended format. Yeah. And so I'm excited to get caught up and view it under that lens and see if the way that I feel changes.
Oh yeah, it's a whole different perspective because you think about like the moments you just saw a lot more, you know, because you can't just move on to the next, move on to the next, move on to the next kind of thing like that. Mm-hmm.
Is there anything critical that we're forgetting? I'm sure there's a lot. I'm sure
there is. I can't think of anything really right now, besides just like length on some things. That's about it for right now.
Sure. Speaking of comments, we are gonna do more JoJo. Yep. So if there's anything we forgot, anything we got heinously wrong, let us know. We're not opposed to that. Yeah. We want to give you guys the best discussion that we can muster up at any given time.
Yeah, we'll hopefully carry it over to part 2 of JoJo. 2.
I want to refer to part 1 as Phantom Blood. And
we should totally do that. Yeah, we should totally do that. Absolutely.
Brad, are we ready to move on to the final part of our show?
Yeah, let's do it.
Where we give our personal recommendations.
Let's do it. Why don't you go and go first?
Okay, I'll go ahead and go first. This is something, I feel a little bit bad because this is something that I've talked about before. Mm-hmm. But then I was like, I love it so much, I'm just going to say it again. So, what I'm recommending today, another comedy.
Ooh. Oh, yeah.
Nichijou, My Ordinary Life. This is the 2nd volume. So, when I recommended Watamote, what I said is, it's a comedy, but if you're somebody that suffers anxiety or depression or, self-identity issues, you might actually get something meaningful out of it. Nichijou is not that, and I mean that in an affectionate way. It's just insane. Mm-hmm. It's just hilarious. Mm-hmm. I feel like I read a lot of slice of life comedy manga, and I feel like I find a lot of it very humorous. It just tickles my particular funny bone.
Yeah, totally.
Nichijou is one of the very few that I remember reading and actually laughing out loud at. Like, the setups are good, and the way that they use recurring humor is amazing. So I'm just going to give you a couple of those. And I feel like explaining it, like, it really is visually funny more than it is, like, textually funny. There's sort of this hoity-toity school kid who always like walks around with a handkerchief and doesn't, I think isn't like quite very aware of how he comes off to other people. Mm-hmm. One of the girls just keeps blowing him up with a rocket launcher and keeps shooting him and keeps throwing grenades at him. So she'll just get so mad that that'll be her initial response. And he'll be like smoldering, surrounded by ruin. And there's also this robot girl who just wants to be a normal girl, but she has this giant like wind-up crank in her back.
Ooh, that's funny.
And the doctor or the scientist that she lives with won't take it off. And
Why?
she just keeps going, please take this thing off me. I just want to be a normal girl. And she's like, no, it makes you so cute. And then something will happen, and they'll realize that she has like some dumb feature, like oh, she can pour coffee, or like her fist can fly in the air. Yeah. And then that moment will happen, and they'll forget the whole thing.
What was that 90s sitcom where they lived with a robot? She was a little girl. Oh, God, what was it called?
Brad, nothing's coming to mind.
Yeah. It's not Short Circuit, is it? No. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
I just thought of that.
All I'm trying to say is Nichijou has brought a lot of joy in my life. I don't think it's profound. I just think it's really funny. Mm-hmm. If you want to feel good moment. Read or watch Nichijou. Yeah. All right.
I want to read and watch it.
Yeah. It's a good time, Brad.
I'm gonna go with an old way throwback. I would call it a classic. Some might not though. Speed Racer.
Yes, Brad.
Man, could be one of the first animes I ever seen. Period.
Mm-hmm.
You know, wee tiny little Brad.
Yeah.
I think my dad showed me it because my mom does not like Speed Racer. I remember, but my dad thought it was pretty cool. Man, the vibe, because it's like 60s era kind of thing like that, and oh my god, it's like a really simple like story. Like family of racers kind of thing like that. Speed eventually becomes a racer. His brother, they supposedly thought died, but he's actually Racer X, and Racer X kind of helps Speed on his way. But they go through some really sweet races. Like there's this race where like there's like a giant. It's like the biggest like bus that's like as long as a train. Yeah. And just rams dudes off the road. It's like super like violent for some reason too. Yeah. Like cars blow when a car blows up, the explosion is like a nuclear bomb too. Also, it's like the entire screen. And that intro theme is a 10 out of 10 intro. Could be one of my favorite anime intros of all time.
I feel like Speed Racer is just inherently awesome, and the situations that it presents are like fun to watch. But because of the animation of the time and like the voice delivery of the time, it's also kind of hokey. Yeah. But that only makes it more awesome.
Yeah, it's got some cheese. Yeah. It's like Roundabout.
Yeah, sure.
It's like not as good as Roundabout, but it's like that kind of same vibe. Speed Racer is a good time. The art, I really love old school like anime or like 60s, 70s, 80s. I love modern day art, but I love a lot of that old stuff too. Oh, it just encapsulates all that so perfectly. Like it's a different moment in time, Yeah. Of like how animation used to be like kind of looked down upon, especially like I always use my mom as a perfect example.
Sure.
Where she's like, their mouths don't move good.
Right.
I'm like, well, give them a break, okay? It's like a cool history piece to me.
Definitely.
But it's also really enjoyable. I would check it out. You should check it out. It's really cool.
Yeah. You made me think of like Astro Boy in the same way.
Yeah, totally same way. You ever see the Speed Racer movie?
No.
Dude, it's so weird, but I like it. Me and Mike liked it.
Here's the thing about the Speed Racer movie is everything that I've heard people say about it online and everything that you and Huber have said.
Only me and Huber.
Yeah.
Me and Huber like it.
No, I think people do like it, and it seems interesting, and I like the Wachowskis. That's a movie that, from a visual perspective, I want to see on a big screen.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the only disappointment that I have.
It's so crazy visually.
Yeah. I want to see it.
Like, the fact that movie exists is amazing to me. Like, that movie should not exist. Sure. Kind of thing like that.
Sure. Maybe like Jupiter Ascending.
It's better than Jupiter Ascending. I did not like Jupiter Ascending.
I'm just throwing some shade. Jupiter Ascending is...
Now I might feel bad, man. Jupiter Ascending, dude, like the villain in that movie, he talks like this the whole time. Then he goes, Mom, no! Just like has random outbursts.
Jupiter Ascending is a bad movie that's fun to watch, but you still walk away going, that was bad.
Yeah. Mila Kunis is like bad.
I know Huber and Kyle like it a lot.
Because they went with Dawn,
Sure, if you go with Dawn,
it's cheating.
Have a bad time.
You're going to have fun no matter what.
You can't have a bad time.
But yeah.
I think that is going to do it for our second part of the EZAnime podcast.
Once again, me and Ben Moore will throw up a poll you can vote on for us to talk about next. How do you feel about us trimming it down, maybe?
Sure. How do you feel about 5 options instead of 10?
I feel good about that.
Okay.
I feel real good about that.
Brad, I think I know what's going to win the next poll.
Oh.
Not going to say it. Don't want to influence the results, but I think I know.
Oh, man.
And that might have to be a several part.
Who says the same things are going to be on the list?
Who says? No, this wasn't on the list last time.
Oh my God.
But that poll, the minute that you see this on YouTube, that poll will be up. You can vote on it. If you are a $1 and up patron. And so this is the part where we plug ourselves. If you want to vote on that poll, influence what we talk about next, if we don't talk about JoJo Part 2 next, go to patreon.com/EasyAllies, throw $1 our way. It really helps us continue to do things like this. And in fact, your support, you guys yelling at us about anime, getting mad at us about anime, wanting us to talk about more things, more stuff, it made this possible.
Yeah.
And we want to go even farther with that. We want to do bigger and better and more involved things. So please go there. Help us out if you can. But at any rate, we appreciate people watching.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. I never, in my wildest dreams, I'd think anyone would listen to us talk about anime.
I really didn't think anyone would.
Yeah.
And some people are.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
It's bizarre, but I'm super appreciative of it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I thought it was fun.
Yeah, it was fun.
I hope you guys thought it was fun. Of course, we are super receptive to feedback. We're trying to change things all the time. If you have any complaints, comments, don't hold back. Let us know. That's going to do it for us.
Yeah.
All right. Until next time, everybody.
Oh my God!